One of the things, though, that has been, we were just talking about it briefly before we kind of started recording, is regulation and how significant that's become, not just even for HMOs, but just buy to let sector in general, the private rented sector. What's your take on that? And, do you ever see it improving or deregulating?
Yeah, I actually do think a period of deregulation is is likely and probably necessary. I think what has happened is all these great ideas, and I think on the most part they have been done with the right intentions in mind, but they've strangled the rental sector, the PRS, and I think that that has had this domino effect. It's ultimately landed on the tenant's lap, and here we are with a huge housing crisis and no clear route out of it. And that's a big problem. It's a huge problem for everybody. So, I think it's, the HMOs are particularly regulated. And I think the regulation around improving the housing standards is good. And actually, it's not that expensive. It's not that expensive to comply with things like HMO licensing,
Yeah,
and, and health and safety bits and pieces.
fire and all that.
Yeah, and I'm totally on board with that. But I could give you some examples. Things like AML and anti-money laundering for my business. Things like that where a lack of common sense is applied to very sort of normal and everyday scenarios that make it incredibly difficult to trade. It makes it very expensive. You've got to pay huge amounts. It really frustrates me that I have to go and pay for an ILA every time I need to get a new mortgage, which is quite often, and they're quite expensive to do, and it takes time. And I think there are simpler ways and cheaper ways to do a lot of things, but of course the banks are spooked and they've been
Yeah.
made to do all these things. So it's something that's got to change, in my opinion.
And I mean, what about things like the Renters Reform Act?
Oh, I mean, where do I begin? Where do you want me to start with that? Done with the right intentions, protect the tenants. There are unscrupulous landlords out there. There's no doubt about that, and that needs to be controlled. But I don't think pushing all of this stuff on all of the good landlords, which by far is the majority, and if you look at all the surveys, that data is very, very clear. 85% plus tenants are happy with their accommodation and happy with their landlords. You know what the worst accommodation is and the worst landlord is? It's the council, and it's the council accommodation. I don't think putting all of this pressure onto private landlords, who on the most part do a good job, is going to help. It's it's not going to dissuade, in my opinion, the bad landlords from being bad landlords.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think what we need is more enforcement, and I think we should put more, we should invest more into those services so that councils can enforce the bad landlords and get them out of the market. But I think there are some very short-sighted ideas, very politically minded. It is short-term politics,
Yeah.
and that's a very dangerous place to be. And it does worry me a little bit that this is where we're going as a society, and I do wonder where this will end as we're speaking now. It looks highly likely that we're going to be looking at a Labour government in the future. That really scares me. You
Yeah,
know,
and they got rent controls and a whole bunch of other stuff that
where do you, I mean,
yeah.
where do you start with that? So there's a lot of really worrying stuff there, and we will all adapt. I have no doubt about that, but
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be in the best interest of everybody.